gay rights, women's rights, and equal racial rights for everyone, whatever their skin color, had pretty much arrived, I would submit, now of course lots of people contest this, but I would submit by the late 20th century and the early part of this century, had arrived at something like their desired destination. And the desired destination was equal. And as I see it in recent years, this has been like watching a train drawing into a station, the desired destination. And then suddenly, just as it's drawing in, gets a head of steam, goes shooting off down the tracks, off the tracks, and starts scattering bodies in its wake. Why, when gay rights have never been better, are they portrayed as if they've never been worse? Why, when women have never been freer and able to make choices about their lives, is everything about the lack of opportunity for women and the discrimination that people see against women? Why do we hear talk of the patriarchy at the least plausible time in human history to do such talk? Why do we see the weaponization of gay people against straight people, of women against men, of black people against white people, and trans against absolutely everyone? Why? What's actually going on? And I think there's a number of things going on, but one of them is simple brute politics, brutal politics. Perhaps it's an image that people don't want in their heads, but trans is the one that gives this thing away. And I think in recent years, the radical left has used transsexuals as a battering ram.
Right, yes.
A battering ram. Yeah. For what? For several things. One is, and you can see it with complete predictability across the system, trans is used by people who want to do something else. I'm not referring to trans individuals who, broadly speaking, want to just live their lives like everyone else. But I'm talking about the people who you can predict with absolute certainty will agree to whatever the latest claim is. Broadly speaking, they are people who want to wage a conflict on the patriarchal, white, cis, heteronormative, capitalist, democratic societies that we live in.
Actually, that's an important point, because you mentioned the book. You know, in the past, when there was a kind of diagram of oppression, you know, capitalism was at the top, and then you had, you know, the workers or whatever. Now, capitalism is still at the top, but you have a different hierarchy of groups that are apparently being oppressed, which is
I say, I as you know, I do each of these landmine issues one by one: gay, women, race, trans, but they have interludes in between them to explain what I think the things going on underneath are. And that's why I have an interlude on the Marxism issue, because you can see the Marxist substrates in a lot of this. I mean, as you say, the pyramid of oppression. Capital is still at the top, money, finance. But this time, instead of the rest of the pyramid being supported merely by the workers and the working class on whose noble shoulders the middle class were, and then the aristocrats and the bishops and so on. This is another form of the pyramid of oppression, but it involves these minority groups. Now, by the way, lest anyone think that I'm some conspiracy theorist on this, I cite at considerable length some of the Marxist scholars who make this completely plain. And I was staggered when I was looking into this at the completely frank way in which some of them write about this. Writers like Lachlan and Mouffe in the 80s are already writing that the working class have basically let us down. Remember, the working class didn't show up for the revolution on time. The working class were a big letdown if you were, a communist in Britain or America in the 20th century. So in the 80s, when they're still trying to work out why the best they've got to show for their horrible experiment is Yugoslavia or Romania, Albania, they're trying to work out why this has happened and why the working class is such a letdown. And they decide that we've got to get a new form of revolutionary class. And they are completely frank that they want to find it in minority groups. They want to find it in women, and one always has to stress that women are not a minority group, but nevertheless they're always packaged in with this. They want to find it in sexual minorities, and they want to find it in racial minorities. Now, there are certain problems in this, and Lachlan and Mouffe, among others, stress that there is a problem because the working class is likely to be racist. This is one of the problems that the communists always had. They always had a problem with the working class. This is just one of them. The working class will be racist and they might not like some of our client groups. Well, this is just another contradiction we need to get over. And in this whole business of contradictions, we see part of the Marxist substructure, but we also see one of the things that the rest of us have to address. Because you and I might think that when you have two opposing things trying to go forward at the same time, one of them's got to give. That contradiction means one of them is wrong.
Yeah.
But one of the things that the Marxists always managed to do was to embrace the contradictions. So I show with the intersectionalists, I show in somewhat gruesome detail, I think, in The Madness of Crowds, that intersectionalism claims that if you unlock one minority group, you unlock the lot.
Yeah.
So we live in a society that's patriarchal, white supremacist, cis heteronormative, etc., it goes without saying. But these things are all interlocked, and if you could undo one, you would undo the whole thing. Now, I point out this is demonstrably wrong. Demonstrably wrong. For instance, trans runs against women, fundamentally. It happens to also run against men, but let's put that one off for another time. It runs fundamentally against women because you cannot claim that being a woman is a performative act which you just become if you would like to become, yet being trans is a hardware issue you have no say over. You can run one of those programs, you can't run both. I submit, and this has not, I think, previously been focused on enough, trans runs totally against gay. Totally against gay. It fundamentally undermines the central claims of the gay and lesbian liberation movements that have gone on over the last half century. So, the intersectionists say, but this will, or if you undo this, never mind the racial one. If you undo these, everything will come right. And I say, no. Since there is such clear and blatant contradictions, why don't you see that one of them has to give? Well, again, the intersectionists, because they're influenced by the Marxists, don't find this a problem like the rest of us would. And they don't think that as a result, maybe you have to re-estimate the whole thing.
The problem is, you see, if they allow for one contradiction, then the whole thing falls down, doesn't it?
See, when I started looking at the intellectual roots of the intersectional movement, I was genuinely amazed. I assumed that there was a body of scholarship, serious scholarship, relatively unreadable scholarship. I assumed that in advance. This is from the American academies, so it goes without saying. But I assumed that it would be some form of serious scholarship, and I was amazed to discover it's either things like this, or, as in the case of Peggy McIntosh, the author of one of the foundational texts of intersectionalism, merely a few pages of assertions. Now, but here again is the thing. That's the problem for the American Academy, which has, goodness knows, a lot of problems. And in substantial examples should just be shut down. I mean, it has nothing to add. It has added nothing for a very long time. But that's not the interesting thing. The interesting thing is, why would these claims have had such an amazingly easy run across the culture? And I go back to this thing of the post-2008 thing. To some extent, the adults in the last 10 years in particular appear to have become so demoralized that they've given up on certain things, or have sued for peace by saying, sure, we'll give you the intrinsic bias training, for instance, in major banks, energy companies, and much more. The implicit bias tests are rife, despite having already been basically disowned by 2 out of the 3 people who formed the first of the tests, who said this wasn't meant to be used like this. Why would all of these major corporations be... you'd have thought that if you wanted to use the work of Judith Butler and the implicit bias test people and all these sort of things, you'd have thought you'd have liked to have seen it tried out successfully somewhere once. Yes. Before you decided to do it in every Western government and every major corporation, all the Fortune 500, you'd have thought you'd have tried it out once. And all of this is being tried in company after company. when it is demonstrably not going to work.
Do you think there's a sort of way back from this?
Well, there has to be, doesn't there? I'm determined to help us get out of this because several reasons. The first is that the part of it that's simply a political push has to be resisted. I think it's deeply immoral to be using people of different skin colours as battering rams against each other for a political project. It's sick. I think it's sick to be using racial or sexual minorities in this manner for political ends. So that has to be stopped. Identified and stopped. But there's also this aspect of it which, because we've talked a bit about the deliberate aspect, that bit, but there is also this aspect of young people who are looking to understand the world, as we always have, and who are being offered this as an answer.
Yep.
Now, they are, I would submit, to put it no strongly, being invited to waste their lives. It's not the case that everything in life is centered around power.
It's actually quite a moving part in the book at the end, where you talk about the fact that leading an entirely political life, as you might put it, is an unrewarding thing. And I think you go off, basically find it in, when you talk about what do people talk about, what do they value in life, it's not positions of power as such, but it's love, and it's things like this.
Yes. Charity, love, forgiveness, family, friends.
Yes.
Meaning.